Title: The Last Whisper of the Damned. Chapter 1: The Ashen World. The world had ended not with a bang, but with a whisper. A whisper that carried the weight of 1,000 screams, 1,000 deaths, and 1,000 regrets. The sky, once a vibrant canvas of blues and whites, was now a perpetual shade of ash-gray, the sun a distant memory, obscured by the thick, choking clouds that never seemed to dissipate. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, a constant reminder of the world that once was. In this desolate landscape, where the remnants of humanity clung to life like parasites on a dying host, there was a place known only as the Hollow. It was a city, or what was left of one. Its towering skyscrapers now skeletal remains, their glass facades shattered, their steel frames twisted and rusted. The streets were littered with the detritus of a civilization that had long since crumbled, abandoned cars, broken furniture, and the occasional bone, picked clean by scavengers. It was here, in the Hollow, that our story begins. Evelyn Harper was a survivor. She had been just a child when the world had ended, barely old enough to understand the gravity of what was happening. But she had adapted, as all survivors must. She had learned to scavenge, to fight, to kill if necessary. She had learned to trust no one, to rely only on herself. And she had learned to listen to the whispers. The whispers were everywhere, carried on the wind, echoing through the empty streets, seeping into the cracks and crevices of the Hollow. They were faint, almost imperceptible, but they were there, a constant presence in the back of her mind. At first, she had thought they were just her imagination, a product of the isolation and the constant fear. But as the years passed, she began to realize that they were something more, something other. The whispers spoke of things that should not be, of horrors that lurked in the shadows, waiting to pounce. They spoke of a place, deep within the heart of the Hollow, where the veil between worlds was thin, where the dead walked among the living, and where the very fabric of reality was stretched to its breaking point. They spoke of a door that should never be opened. Evelyn had always dismissed the whispers as nonsense, the ramblings of a mind pushed to the brink of madness. But then she found the journal. It was in an old, dilapidated building on the outskirts of the Hollow. The handwriting barely legible, as if the author had been in a hurry, or perhaps in a state of panic. The entry spoke of the whispers, of the door, and of something called the Last Whisper of the Damned. According to the journal, the last whisper was a key that could open the door and unleash whatever lay beyond. The author had been searching for it, had come close to finding it, but had ultimately failed. The last entry was a warning, a plea to anyone who might find the journal to leave the Hollow, to forget about the whispers and to never, under any circumstances, seek out the last whisper. Evelyn should have heeded the warning. She should have left the journal where she found it and walked away. But she didn't. She couldn't. The whispers had gotten louder, more insistent. And she knew that she would never be free of them until she found the last whisper and opened the door. And so, with the journal in hand, Evelyn set out into the heart of the Hollow. Into the darkness, into the unknown. She didn't know what she would find, or if she would even survive. But she knew one thing for certain: once she opened the door, there would be no turning back. Chapter 2: The Descent into Madness. The deeper Evelyn ventured into the Hollow, the more the world around her seemed to warp and twist, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling. The buildings, already in a state of decay, appeared to lean at impossible angles, their shadows stretching out like grasping fingers. The air grew colder, the whispers louder, more insistent. They were no longer just faint murmurs in the back of her mind, they were voices, clear and distinct, speaking to her, urging her forward. "Find the key," they said. "Open the door." Evelyn tried to ignore them, to focus on the task at hand, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. The journal had provided her with some clues, but they were cryptic, fragmented. As if the author had been trying to conceal the truth even as they wrote it down. She had pieced together a rough map, a path that would lead her to the heart of the hollow. To the place where the door was said to be hidden. But the journey was fraught with danger. The hollow was not uninhabited. There were others, survivors like herself, but they were not to be trusted. The world had turned them into monsters, driven them to madness by the constant fear and the unrelenting whispers. They roamed the streets in packs, scavenging for food, for supplies, for anything that would keep them alive for one more day. They were desperate, and desperation made them dangerous. Evelyn had encountered a few of them already, and each encounter had left her more shaken than the last. They were not like the people she had known before the end. They were hollow, their eyes empty, their souls stripped away by the horrors they had witnessed. They were no longer human, not really. They were something else, something less. But the survivors were not the only danger. The hollow was home to other things, things that defied explanation, things that should not exist. Evelyn had seen them out of the corner of her eye. Fleeting glimpses of shapes that moved too quickly to be human, of shadows that seemed to have a life of their own. She had heard their whispers, too. Whispers that were different from the ones in her mind, whispers that spoke of hunger, of pain, of death. She tried to push the fear aside, to focus on the task at hand. But it was becoming harder and harder. The whispers were growing louder, more insistent, and she could feel them pulling at her, dragging her deeper into the darkness. She knew that she was losing herself, that the line between reality and madness was becoming blurred, but she couldn't stop. She had to find the last whisper. She had to open the door. The journal had mentioned a place, a building that stood at the center of the hollow, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. It was there, the author had written, that the door could be found. Evelyn had been searching for it for days, following the clues, navigating the labyrinthine streets, avoiding the dangers that lurked around every corner. And now, at last, she was close. She could feel it, a pull, a tug at her very soul, drawing her toward the heart of the hollow. The whispers were almost deafening now. A cacophony of voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. They were no longer just urging her forward, they were commanding her, demanding that she find the key. That she open the door. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest as she approached the building. It was different from the others, taller, more imposing, its facade still intact despite the years of decay. The windows were dark, the doors sealed shut, but she could feel something emanating from within, a presence, a power that made her skin crawl. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the door handle. The journal had warned her, had pleaded with her to turn back, to forget about the whispers, to leave the hollow and never return. But she couldn't. The whispers were too loud, too insistent. They had become a part of her, and she knew that she would never be free of them until she opened the door. With a deep breath, Evelyn pushed the door open and stepped inside. Chapter 3: The Door. The interior of the building was unlike anything Evelyn had ever seen. The walls were covered in strange, intricate patterns. Symbols that seemed to shift and change as she looked at them, as if they were alive. The air was thick with the scent of decay, but there was something else, something other. It was a smell she couldn't quite place, a mixture of sulfur and something sweet, something sickly. The whispers were louder here, more intense. As if they were coming from within the walls themselves. They were no longer just voices, they were images, flashes of things that should not be, of horrors that defied comprehension. Evelyn tried to block them out, to focus on the task at hand, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. The line between reality and madness was blurring, and she could feel herself slipping, falling into the abyss. She moved through the building cautiously, her footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The journal had mentioned a specific room, a place where the veil between worlds was at its thinnest. It was there, the author had written, that the door could be found. Evelyn had no idea what to expect, but she knew that she was close. The pull was stronger now, almost overwhelming, and she could feel it drawing her deeper into the building. At last, she reached the room. It was at the end of a long, dark hallway. The door slightly ajar, a faint light emanating from within. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, her hand trembling as she reached for the door handle. The whispers were almost deafening now. A cacophony of voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. They were no longer just urging her forward, they were commanding her, demanding that she open the door. With a deep breath, Evelyn pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was small, almost claustrophobic, the walls covered in the same strange symbols as the rest of the building. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and on the pedestal was a key. It was unlike any key Evelyn had ever seen, made of a dark, almost black metal. Its surface covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shift and change as she looked at them. The whispers were coming from the key, she realized, emanating from it in waves, pulling her closer, drawing her in. Evelyn reached out, her hand trembling as she grasped the key. The moment her fingers touched it, the whispers stopped. The room fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. She could feel the power of the key, a dark, malevolent energy that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. It was the last whisper of the damned, the key that would open the door. But what lay beyond the door? The journal had warned her, had pleaded with her to turn back, to forget about the whispers, to leave the hollow and never return. But it was too late for that now. She had come too far, had sacrificed too much. She had to know. She had to see. With the key in hand, Evelyn turned to the door. It was there, in the corner of the room, almost hidden in the shadows. It was a simple door, unremarkable in every way, but she could feel the power emanating from it, a dark, malevolent energy that made her skin crawl. The whispers had returned. But they were different now, more urgent, more desperate. "Open the door," they said. "Open the door." Evelyn hesitated for a moment, her hand trembling as she reached for the door handle. The journal had warned her, had pleaded with her to turn back, to forget about the whispers, to leave the hollow and never return. But she couldn't. The whispers were too loud, too insistent. They had become a part of her, and she knew that she would never be free of them until she opened the door. With a deep breath, Evelyn inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a darkness so absolute that it seemed to swallow the light. The whispers were deafening now. A cacophony of voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. They were no longer just urging her forward, they were commanding her, demanding that she step through the door. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that once she stepped through the door, there would be no turning back. But she had come too far, had sacrificed too much. She had to know. She had to see. With a deep breath, Evelyn stepped through the door. Chapter 4: The Other Side. The moment Evelyn stepped through the door, the world around her changed. The darkness was absolute, suffocating, as if she had been plunged into a void. The whispers were gone, replaced by a silence so profound that it seemed to press in on her from all sides. She could feel the weight of it, the oppressive stillness, as if the very air had been sucked out of the room. For a moment, she thought she had gone blind, that the darkness had taken her sight. But then, slowly, her eyes began to adjust, and she realized that she was not in complete darkness. There was a faint light, a pale, sickly glow that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. It was enough to see by, but just barely. The room she was in was unlike anything she had ever seen. The walls were made of a strange, almost organic material, pulsating faintly, as if they were alive. The floor was slick with a thick, viscous liquid that clung to her boots as she walked. The air was thick with the scent of decay, but there was something else, something other. It was a smell she couldn't quite place, a mixture of sulfur and something sweet, something sickly. Evelyn moved cautiously, her footsteps echoing in the empty room. The door behind her had vanished, leaving her with no way to go but forward. She could feel the weight of the key in her hand, its dark, malevolent energy pulsing in time with her heartbeat. It was the last whisper of the damned, the key that had opened the door. But what lay beyond? As she moved deeper into the room, the walls began to change. The strange, organic material seemed to shift and writhe, as if it were alive. The faint light grew brighter, illuminating the room in a pale, sickly glow. And then, she saw it. In the center of the room was a figure, hunched over, its back to her. It was humanoid, but not quite human. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, its limbs long and spindly. Its fingers ending in sharp, claw-like nails. It was wearing tattered robes, the fabric hanging loosely from its emaciated frame. And it was whispering. The whispers were faint, almost imperceptible. But they were there, a constant presence in the back of her mind. They were different from the ones she had heard before, more personal. They spoke of things that should not be. Of horrors that lurked in the shadows, waiting to pounce. They spoke of her fears, her regrets, her darkest secrets. Evelyn tried to block them out, to focus on the task at hand. But it was becoming increasingly difficult. The line between reality and madness was blurring, and she could feel herself slipping, falling into the abyss. She knew that she had to confront the figure, to find out what it was, what it wanted. But she was afraid. Afraid of what she might find. With a deep breath, Evelyn stepped forward, her hand tightening around the key. The figure turned, slowly, its movements jerky, unnatural. Its face was a mask of horror, its eyes sunken, its mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. And then, it spoke. "Welcome, Evelyn Harper," it said, its voice a raspy whisper. "We have been waiting for you." Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the figure. It knew her name. How did it know her name? The whispers had returned, louder now, more insistent, as if they were coming from the figure itself. They were no longer just urging her forward, they were commanding her. Demanding that she listen. "Who are you?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling. The figure smiled, its grotesque grin widening. We are the damned, it said. The ones who were left behind. The ones who were forgotten. We've been waiting for you, Evelyn Harper. Waiting for you to open the door. Evelyn's mind raced as she tried to make sense of what the figure was saying. The damned. The ones who were left behind. What did it mean? The journal had mentioned a last whisper of the damned, but it had never explained what it was. Was this it? Was this the damned? Why? Evelyn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why were you waiting for me? The figure's smile widened, its eyes gleaming with a malevolent light. Because you are the key, it said. The key to our freedom. The key to our revenge. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the truth. The last whisper of the damned was not just a key, it was a weapon. A weapon that could open the door, that could unleash the damned upon the world. And she had opened the door. With a deep breath, Evelyn stepped back, her hand tightening around the key. She had to get out of here. She had to close the door. But the figure was already moving, its long, spindly limbs reaching out for her, its claws glinting in the pale light. Too late, it whispered. Its voice a raspy hiss. Too late. Evelyn turned and ran, her footsteps echoing in the empty room. The walls seemed to close in around her, the strange, organic material pulsating, writhing. As if it were alive. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. They were no longer just urging her forward. They were commanding her, demanding that she stop, that she turn back. But Evelyn couldn't stop. She had to get out of here. She had to close the door. At last, she reached the door. The key still clutched tightly in her hand. She could feel the weight of it, the dark, malevolent energy pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She had to close the door. She had to lock it. With a deep breath, Evelyn inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The door creaked shut, the whispers fading into silence. The room was still, the air thick with the scent of decay. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest as she realized what she had done. She had opened the door. She had unleashed the damned. But she had also closed it. She had locked the door, trapping the damned on the other side. For now. With a deep breath, Evelyn turned and walked. Chapter 5. The Last Whisper of the Damned. The air in the crypt was thick with the scent of decay and the weight of centuries. Elena's torch flickered weakly, casting long, trembling shadows on the ancient stone walls. She could feel the presence of something that didn't belong in the world of the living. It was a sensation that crawled up her spine, like icy fingers tracing the contours of her soul. This is it, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant drip of water. The final resting place of the damned. The tomb before her was unlike the others. Its surface was carved with intricate runes, their edges worn smooth by time but still pulsing faintly with an otherworldly light. The symbols seemed to shift under her gaze, as if alive, whispering secrets she couldn't quite understand. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and brushed them against the cold stone. A shudder ran through her, and the whispers grew louder. They were no longer distant, no longer faint. They were inside her mind now, a cacophony of voices, pleading, screaming, laughing. She clamped her hands over her ears, but it did nothing to silence them. "Stop," she cried, her voice breaking. "Leave me alone." But the voices only grew more insistent. They spoke in tongues she didn't recognize, their words twisting and writhing like serpents. And then, amidst the chaos, one voice rose above the rest. It was clear, cold, and filled with a malice that made her blood run cold. "You should not have come here, child." Elena froze. The voice was no longer in her mind, it was in the room with her. She turned slowly, her torchlight revealing a figure standing in the shadows. It was tall, impossibly so, its form shifting and wavering like smoke. Its eyes glowed with a sickly green light, and its smile was a jagged gash across its face. What are you?" she stammered, taking a step back. The figure tilted its head, its grin widening. "I am the last whisper of the damned," it said, its voice echoing as if from the depths of a chasm. "The final breath of those who were forsaken. And you, Elena, have awakened me." Elena's heart pounded in her chest. She had read about this in the ancient texts, but she had never truly believed it. The last whisper was said to be a guardian of the damned, a spirit bound to protect their secrets. But it was also a harbinger of death, a creature that fed on the souls of those who dared to disturb its slumber. "I didn't mean to," she said, her voice trembling. "I was only trying to." "To what?" The creature interrupted, its voice a low growl. "To uncover what should have remained buried. To claim power that was never meant for mortal hands." It stepped closer, and Elena could feel the cold radiating from its form. She tightened her grip on the torch, though she knew it would do little to protect her. The creature laughed, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. "You are brave, I will give you that," it said. "But bravery will not save you now." Elena's mind raced. She had to think of something, anything, to escape. Her eyes darted around the crypt, searching for a way out, but the walls seemed to close in around her. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and she felt her strength beginning to wane. And then, just as the creature reached for her, a voice cut through the chaos. "Elena!" She turned, her heart leaping with hope. It was Marcus, his face pale but determined as he stood in the entrance of the crypt. In his hand, he held a blade that glowed with a faint blue light, a relic from the old world, one that was said to banish spirits. The creature hissed, its form flickering like a dying flame. "You dare interfere," it snarled, its voice filled with rage. Marcus didn't respond. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on the creature, and raised the blade. The light from it grew brighter, filling the crypt with a cold, piercing radiance. The creature recoiled, its form beginning to dissolve. "This is not over," it whispered, its voice fading into nothingness. "The damned will have their due." And then it was gone, leaving only silence in its wake. Elena collapsed to her knees, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Marcus was at her side in an instant, his hand steady as he helped her to her feet. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. She nodded, though her legs still felt like jelly. "I thought I was done for," she admitted. "How did you find me?" Marcus hesitated, his expression darkening. "I heard the whispers," he said quietly. "They led me here." Elena's blood ran cold. "You heard them too?" He nodded. "And I fear this is only the beginning."